Now, recently, I started looking to buy a 3 BHK house here in Bengaluru, and the more I learnt about this industry, the more I feel like staying away. The entire market feels rigged and against the middle class. Imagine this, your friend earns 35 lakh rupees annually, a genuinely respectable income in Bengaluru's thriving tech ecosystem, yet he's facing an impossible equation. A 3 BHK apartment in HSR layout costs 3 crores, which is 102 times his monthly salary. After all the down payment he had to make, his EMI is about 48% of his take-home pay, which means almost half of every rupee he earns goes towards his home loan. But his father's generation faced a little different India. 3 decades ago, the same sized apartment in Bengaluru was just 25 times the monthly salary, which was achievable in 2 years of aggressive saving. So, despite earning 4 times more than his father in inflation-adjusted terms, your friend needs 4 times longer to own the same property. Now, this isn't just an affordability crisis, it's a systematic extraction mechanism, and I'm going to show you exactly how it breaks and who benefits. Hi, if you're new to this channel, I'm Vikas Kulkarni and I talk about money, but for a change, this time I'm talking about the entire broken system. Let's begin with the global metric that reveals India's housing crisis, the price to income ratio, the PI ratio. How many years of annual household income you need to buy a home tells us if we are in a normal market or a broken one. Globally, a PI ratio between 3 and 5 is considered healthy. Anything above 5 means housing is becoming unaffordable, and here's where India stands. In Mumbai, the PI ratio is 14.3. An average Mumbaiker needs 14 years of income to buy a home, and in Delhi NCR it's 10.1. 10 years of your entire annual salary, every rupee earned spent on a single property. And in Bengaluru, the PI ratio is roughly 8 to 9 depending on the area. That is still massive. The most affordable metro in India, Kolkata, sits at a PI ratio of 6.6, and it is still higher compared to global standards. Now compare this to the world actually, right? New York sits at 3.6 and London has a PI ratio of 7.6. Now Indian cities are more expensive. The national average PI ratio across India is 7.5, meaning on an average Indians spend 7.5 years of their entire annual income just to purchase a home. Now this has climbed from 6.6 in 2020 to 7.5 now. The affordability crisis is getting worse and not better. Now here's where the real pain hits, right? It's not just about the price of the real estate market. It's about how much of your monthly income vanishes into home loan payments. The EMI to income ratio tells you what percentage of your salary goes into monthly home loan installments. Globally, anything above 40% is considered financially risky. You're being squeezed too tight. Now if we take Mumbai, on an average 48% of monthly income goes into paying EMIs. Nearly half of your salary is gone even before you think about food or electricity or insurance. If we talk about Delhi NCR, 28% of monthly income, better than Mumbai but still above the danger threshold. And if we talk about Hyderabad, right, 30% of monthly income, and the national average is 61% across India in the last year 2024. But the insidious part is that this 61% is not what your friendly banker advertised. It's a calculated metric based on rising interest rates. Current home loan rates range anywhere between 7 to 10% depending on the lender. Banks know this. They offer longer tenures not to make homes affordable but to make unaffordable homes financeable. The EMI fits budget on your paper, but what about your financial freedom that's stretched across 3 decades? If homes are this expensive, surely only wealthy Indians are buying them, right? Wrong. The real buyers fall into these 3 categories, and none of them are regular middle class Indians who actually need a place to live. The first set of people are the NRIs. Non-resident Indians now account for 18 to 20% of all property purchases in India's metros. That's 1 in 5 homes sold. In premium pockets of Mumbai, Bangalore or Gurugram, this number hits as high as 25%. It's because they earn in dollars or euros or pounds, and when the rupee weakens, which it does quite regularly, a 3 crore apartment suddenly looks like a bargain to someone who's earning $100,000 salary annually. That's their entry point. They're not buying for rental income or traditional investment returns. They're parking wealth in a stable jurisdiction. An NRI earns differently, thinks differently, and plays by different financial rules than you do. When they compete for property with you, you've already lost. And then there is this ugly black money problem, the cash in hand economy. The thing is, black money never left. 9 years after demonetization, cash transactions in real estate remain rampant and structural. Here's Here's what a survey of over 39,000 property buyers revealed. 66% of property buyers admitted to paying a portion of the transaction in cash. 26% reported paying over half the property value in cash, and 19% paid between 30 to 50% of the value in cash. 2/3 of home buyers are making undeclared cash payments. The income tax department detected 30,444 crore in undisclosed income through real estate surveys in 2024 and 2025. Now, this is not a small issue. It's the core mechanism of inflating prices. Here's how it works. A property shows a registered value of 1 crore rupees, but the actual transaction is not 1 crore. It's 1.5 crore. Half is cash and half is check. The difference, 50 lakh rupees, is just black money finding a home. Now, this money doesn't care about affordability metrics or rental yields. It just needs to disappear into bricks and mortar. When you're competing for a property against someone with 50 lakh rupees in undisclosed income, you're competing with someone playing a completely different game. Now, in all this, right, the new landlords are institutional investors, and institutional investors in Indian real estate hit a record $8.9 billion in 2024, a 51% increase from 2023. Private equity investments in just the first half of 2025 surged to $2.4 billion, marking a whopping 38% year-on-year growth. Now, residential real estate attracted the highest share at 45% of institutional investment inflows in 2024. Now, 70% of these institutional investments in residential income come from equity sources, not debt. That means deep-pocketed funds buying residential units as long-term appreciating assets. Blackstone pumped $378 million into a single mall deal in 2025. Now, Sumitomo invested $295 million in Mumbai real estate, and Brookfield committed $151 million. Now, these aren't individuals saving up for their first home, right? These are global capital pools with 10 to 20 year time horizons, hunting for assets that appreciate 7 to 8% annually. And when you enter the housing market competing against Blackstone, your personal financial situation is irrelevant. Now, here's why the supply chain always stays choked, right? And it's by design. Now, you might think if homes are expensive, builders should build more, supply should increase, and prices should fall. That's logical. It's also not. Here's what's happening. The supply is intentionally restricted. Let me walk you through why. FSI, Floor Space Index. FSI is the ratio of total built-up area to plot area. It controls how much you can build on a given piece of land. Lower the FSI number, fewer homes per plot, meaning higher prices. Now, Mumbai's FSI is 1.33 on the island and 1 in the suburbs. Now, compare this to globally. Shanghai sits at an FSI value of 13.1. Singapore, 20 to 25 in core areas. New York, Manhattan, FSI of 12 to 15. If Mumbai allowed Shanghai level density, it could house 10 more people on the same land. Prices would collapse under supply pressure, but why doesn't it happen? The justification is always infrastructure congestion or preserving character, right? The effect is always the same. Supply stays constrained, prices stay elevated, and in premium projects, builders can acquire higher FSI by paying a premium fee, which is another revenue source for the government. The irony is, relaxing FSI could theoretically reduce per unit housing costs through economies of scale. More apartments on the same land equals cheaper per apartment cost, but that's not the incentive structure in place. And then there is this approval hell. Getting approved to build in India officially takes 15 to 30 days for individual houses and 2 to 6 months for apartments. But in reality, builders report 3 to 4 years from land acquisition to first brick. Now, every delay adds holding costs, interest on land loans, staff, management, regulatory compliance. A 2-year delay costs about 10 to 20 lakh rupees in additional expenses per unit. You know where all this comes from? It's your EMIs. After all that, urban and peri-urban land is entangled in legal disputes, unclear titles, and agricultural classifications that prevent residential conversion. Much of potential housing land is locked in this bureaucratic nightmare. Builders then get a convenient narrative, and they go like, we'd love to build affordable homes, sir, but we can't acquire land or get approvals. While this is partially true, but the result is that the supply of homes for the middle class has collapsed. Affordable homes below 80 lakh rupees used to constitute to about 52.4% of new home launches in 2018. By 2025, this dropped to just 17% across India's top 8 cities. The 50 to 80 lakh segment where the middle class actually shops is disappearing. You either buy a 30 lakh flat or a 40 lakh flat in a far suburb with no infrastructure, or you stretch yourself and buy that 1.5 crore or 2-3 crore luxury apartment. There's simply no middle ground anymore. The system is designed to keep it this way. Now, for the uncomfortable truth, this is not malfunction, right? This is the design of how bad the system is. Government revenue, why politicians love high prices, states and municipalities are addicted to real estate revenue, stamp duty, property registration, development charges, and together these contribute 30 to 40% of municipal budgets in major cities. In Maharashtra, a stamp duty is about 5 to 7% of property value. In Karnataka, it's 5%, and in Delhi, it's 6%. When your friend buys that 3 crore apartment, the Maharashtra government makes 15 to 21 lakh rupees in stamp duty alone instantly. Now imagine if that property's price crashed by 30%. Government revenue also crashes by 30%. Who votes for that? No politician. This is why governments never push hard for affordability. And then banks push this extended tenure trap. Home loan tenures used to be capped at 15 years. Now banks offer 30 years routinely. Some NBFCs push as high as 35 and 40-year loans. This is not consumer friendly, it's just their bank or NBFC friendly. Home loans are banks' safest and highest margin product. Default rates are low because people prioritize home loans payments over everything. When banks extend tenures, right, they're extending your obligation, not reducing your burden. The system even has a built-in extension mechanism. When interest rates rise, instead of raising your EMI, banks extend your tenure. A 25-year loan becomes 30 years, then 35 years. You think you're protected, you're actually being perpetually enslaved to the payment schedule. And then there are builders building for the highest bidder. Private builders in India build for whoever pays the most. NRIs, black money operators, institutional investors, they don't care. Whoever pays the most, they build it for them. They don't build for the middle class at all because the margins are simply not there. Like, think of it, build a 2 crore luxury apartment, make 40 lakh rupees in profit, or build 40 lakh rupees affordable apartments and make 10 lakh rupees in profit. Which one do you choose? Government schemes like Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana promised affordable housing. The market has responded by making affordable housing structurally unprofitable. The segment itself is disappearing. Now here's something that no agent will tell you. Buying a home as an investment in India makes almost no financial sense. Average gross rental yields in India are 3.62%. Ahmedabad tops the list at 3.9%. Meanwhile, a fixed deposit earns you a 7% return with zero tenant management, zero vacancy risk, or zero legal disputes. If you buy a 1 crore apartment at 3.62% rental yield, you earn 36,200 monthly, but your EMI is at 8.5%. The interest is 72,000 rupees or above per month. You're losing money every month. Now this mismatch shouldn't exist in a healthy market. High prices should come with high rental returns, but here in India, high prices come with pathetic returns. This tells you one thing: people are buying for reasons other than financial logic. They're buying because they have black money to park, because they're NRIs seeking currency diversification, or because they've been convinced by society that home ownership at any price is success. Now here's what this means for you. If you're planning to buy a house in Bengaluru, Delhi or Mumbai, you need to understand these three things. First, you're not buying in a free market. You're buying in a rigged one. Prices are elevated by design. Government needs revenue, banks need interest, builders need margins, investors need appreciation. Collectively, they have the power to keep prices high. We just have to accept this. Second, keep your EMIs under 40% of your take-home income. When the bank approves a larger loan, they are not helping you. That's them maximizing their book value. You'll feel the squeeze when interest rates rise, which they will because the tenure is so long, or when your income growth plateaus, or when life throws you an unexpected expense. And third, seriously consider whether renting makes sense. Take the EMI you would pay, say 1.5 lakh rupees, and invest 1 lakh rupees in equity index funds while renting for 50,000 rupees. Over 20 years, your index fund investments could grow to 60 to 70 lakhs. Your home equity from a 2 crore property might appreciate to 4 crore, but you've traded flexibility, liquidity, and mental freedom for illiquidity and emotional attachment. The middle ground has just vanished in India's real estate market. The system is working exactly as designed. The question isn't whether housing is overvalued by every global metric, which of course it is. The question is, will you play by its rules, or will you choose to make a choice that actually serves your well? Alright, that was the video for today. And honestly, this kinda came from a place of frustration when I was looking into buying a home for myself. This video got lengthier than usual because of how many layers there are to this issue. If you have made it this far far in the video, thank you so much for watching, and I would appreciate if you can subscribe to the channel. Thanks again and bye.